They laughed when she picked up the rifle. Now she's the most decorated sharpshooter in SEAL history. The boardroom at Ethelred and Croft Designs in Chicago felt less like a room and more like a high-altitude peak. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off a glass table so polished it reflected the nervous faces of the junior architects. The air, thick with the scent of expensive coffee and self-importance, hummed with a tension that had nothing to do with the city skyline outside. At the head of the table sat Julian Croft, a senior partner whose tailored suit seemed to be cut from pure arrogance. His voice sliced through the silence, sharp and dismissive. "The Zenith Tower is not just a building, it's a statement," he declared, gesturing to a massive holographic model shimmering in the center of the room. It was a beautiful, twisted spire of glass and steel, a monument to his ego. "It is our legacy." From the far end of the table, a small voice, barely a whisper, spoke up. "Sir, there might be an issue with the lateral load calculations on the upper floors." All eyes turned. Ilara Vance, a 22-year-old intern, sat almost hidden behind her laptop. She was the youngest person in the room by 2 decades, and the only one not wearing a power suit. Julian Croft leaned forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He looked at her not as a colleague, but as an insect he'd just found crawling on his desk. "An issue," he repeated, the words dripping with condescension. "And you, the intern, found it? Did you use your magic crayons?" A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the room. Ilara's face burned, but her gaze remained steady. Her hands, hidden under the table, clenched tightly around a small, worn leather sketchbook. It was her father's, filled with his elegant, handwritten notes on structural integrity. A man whose genius had been celebrated in universities, but never given a name on a building. It was her most prized possession, a silent promise she'd made to his memory. Frank, an older draftsman sitting near the back, frowned, his weathered face creasing with concern. He had known Ilara's father. He saw the same quiet, unshakable honesty in her eyes, and he knew this wasn't a guess. It was a fact. Julian, however, only saw an opportunity to assert his dominance. He stood, his shadow falling over Ilara. "Let me be clear, little girl. I designed the Zenith. I approved the calculations. Are you questioning my judgment?" Ilara took a quiet breath, her voice still soft but firm. "I'm questioning the math, sir." The room fell dead silent. The challenge had been made. The humiliation was just beginning. The silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. The other architects, who just moments before had been laughing, now shifted in their seats. Some shot Ilara glances of pity, others of annoyance. They were complicit in their silence, reinforcing the invisible wall of hierarchy that Julian Croft had built around himself. No one dared to side with the intern against the partner. To do so would be career suicide. They looked down at their notes, at their phones, anywhere but at the girl being publicly dissected. Julian's smirk widened. He saw their fear, and it fed him. He interpreted Ilara's calm as weakness, her quiet defiance as childish stubbornness. He had expected her to stammer, to apologize, to shrink back into her chair. But she didn't. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, her posture unbroken. This was his miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a frightened child, not a silent warrior holding a shield of truth. Instead of backing down, Ilara did something small, almost imperceptible. She pushed her father's sketchbook a single inch forward on the table. It was a tiny act of grace, a quiet claiming of her space and her heritage. It was a signal that she wouldn't be erased. Frank, watching from the back, recognized the gesture. He had seen her father do the same thing decades ago, in this very boardroom, when his own revolutionary ideas were dismissed by a different set of arrogant men. A flicker of something, a memory, a hint of her hidden strength, passed between them. Julian saw the book and scoffed. "What's in there? Your diary. Let's make this interesting. He walked around the table, his steps deliberate and intimidating. He stopped beside her. You think you're smarter than my entire team of senior engineers? You think a flaw that they missed you found? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper for the whole room to hear. Prove it. You have until end of day. The full project model is yours. Find your fatal flaw and show it to everyone. But when you fail, and you will fail, you will stand before this team and apologize for wasting our time. Then you'll pack your desk. Deal? The air crackled. It wasn't a challenge. It was an execution order. He was giving her an impossible task, designed to break her. He expected her to crumble. But Alara simply nodded once, her voice clear and steady. Deal! A wave of dread washed over the room. The executives exchanged nervous glances. They were no longer watching a simple workplace spat. They were about to witness a public sacrifice. Alara was moved from the boardroom to a single, isolated workstation in the center of the vast, open-plan design floor. It was a fishbowl, designed for maximum visibility and humiliation, the holographic model of the Zenith Tower, a shimmering ghost of a building, was loaded onto the massive screen in front of her. The project file contained millions of data points, a digital labyrinth designed by 100 different engineers over 3 years. Navigating it to find a single flaw in under 8 hours was like finding a single grain of sand on a mile-long beach. Julian Croft stood with his cronies by the coffee machine, watching her. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. I give her an hour before the tears start, he sneered. Another replied, I'll bet you $50 she doesn't even know how to run the simulation software. Their laughter was a poison dart, aimed directly at her back. But Alara didn't hear them. Or if she did, she gave no sign. She placed her father's sketchbook beside the keyboard. It wasn't just a book of notes. It was her anchor. She opened it to a specific page, where her father had sketched a diagram of wind shear dynamics. His handwriting was neat, precise. A tower's greatest enemy is not gravity, he had written. It is the wind it cannot see. It must bend, or it will break. Honesty in the numbers is the only thing that lets it bend. She closed her eyes for a moment, his voice a calm echo in her mind. Then she began. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. Her movements were fluid, economical, a symphony of quiet competence. She wasn't searching randomly. She was targeting specific data sets, isolating variables with a precision that was startling. Frank walked past, placing a cup of hot coffee on her desk. He didn't say a word, but his eyes conveyed a message. He would be proud. The initial mockery from Croft's team began to fade, replaced by a confused silence. The architects and engineers who had been pretending to work were now openly watching her screen. They expected to see a fumbling intern lost in a sea of code. Instead, they saw a master at work. She was peeling back the layers of the digital model like an onion, going deeper and deeper into its core logic. The impossible task was starting to look possible. The air on the design floor began to change. The quiet hum of computers was now the only sound, a backdrop to the silent battle being waged on a single screen. Hours bled into one another. The afternoon sun slanted across the office floor, casting long shadows. The gallery of onlookers had grown. No one had left. The confident smirks on the faces of Julian's team had been replaced by tense, tight-lipped expressions. Alara hadn't taken a single break. Her focus was absolute, a bubble of concentration that no amount of pressure could pop. Her father's sketchbook lay open, its pages a silent testament to the knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Julian Croft paced behind her, the rhythm of his expensive shoes on the polished concrete floor a nervous tick. He had expected this to be over by lunch. He had envisioned a tearful confession, a satisfying reassertion of his authority. But now, watching Alara navigate the complex structural simulations, a cold knot of dread began to tighten in his stomach. She wasn't just checking numbers. She was running diagnostics he hadn't seen since his university days. Advanced, esoteric, and terrifyingly accurate. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, but he was powerless to stop it. Then, she found it. A single, elegant line of code appeared on her screen. She isolated it. It was a manual override, buried deep within the wind load simulation parameters. A small, almost undetectable correction factor that smoothed out the data for the upper floors, making the design appear more stable than it actually was. It was a lie, written in the language of mathematics, a lie someone had deliberately hidden. Alara took a deep breath. This was the moment. She looked up at the main holographic display, where the Zenith Tower shimmered in all its flawed glory. With a final, deliberate click of the mouse, she removed the fraudulent line of code and reran the simulation. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The tower stood, majestic and proud. Julian almost let out a sigh of relief. And then it began. A thin, crimson line appeared near the 80th floor. It spiderwebbed outwards, a visual representation of catastrophic structural stress. The simulation showed a 100-mile-per-hour crosswind, a scenario the tower was supposed to withstand easily. But without the fake data, the model buckled. The top third of the holographic tower began to twist, its beautiful, sleek lines contorting in an impossible dance of failure. The crimson lines spread, indicating total structural collapse. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The billion-dollar monument, the firm's legacy, the symbol of Julian Croft's genius, was a death trap. And a 22-year-old intern had just proven it to everyone. The power in the room didn't just shift. It shattered. Julian stared at the screen, his face ashen. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His hands trembled, just slightly. It was over. The silence that followed was absolute. A deafening verdict delivered not by a judge, but by the undeniable truth of physics. The holographic image of the failing tower hung in the air, a silent, damning indictment. The silence was finally broken, not by an executive, but by Frank. His voice, though quiet, carried across the entire floor. That was David Vance's resonance cascade theory, he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and grief. I never thought I'd see it applied in practice. He looked from the screen to Alara, and then directly at Julian Croft. The look wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was filled with a profound, knowing disappointment. That single glance was a crack in the dam, and the flood of disapproval followed. The other architects and engineers, no longer afraid, turned to Croft. Their faces were a mixture of shock, anger, and betrayal. They had put their names on this project. They had trusted him. Croft, pale and cornered, finally found his voice, but it was weak and brittle. It's a glitch, a theoretical anomaly. The model is flawed, not the design. But no one was listening. His authority had evaporated. Just then, a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension. What is going on here, Julian? Evelyn Reed, the firm's CEO and co-founder, stood at the edge of the design floor. She was a woman in her late 60s with a reputation for integrity that was as solid as the foundations of the buildings her firm designed. Frank had called her an hour ago. She had been watching from her office balcony. Croft stammered, his usual eloquence gone. Evelyn. The intern she was running an unauthorized diagnostic. Evelyn ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on Alara. Young lady, she said, her tone gentle but firm. Walk me through it. Alara stood, her voice retaining its quiet humility. She didn't point fingers. She didn't say, I told you so. She simply explained the math, her words clear, concise, and devastatingly simple. She pointed to the screen, showing where the data had been manipulated. When she finished, Evelyn Reed was silent for a long moment. She looked at the crimson lines of failure on her flagship project, then at the arrogant partner who had almost led them to disaster, and finally at the young intern who had saved them. Evelyn turned back to Alara. "Your father was a brilliant man, but they never gave him the credit he deserved. It seems we almost made the same mistake twice." She looked around the room. "This project is halted, effective immediately. We're launching a full audit of every project Mr. Croft has overseen in the last 10 years. Then, she looked at Alara, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "What's your name?" "Alara Vance, ma'am." "Well, Alara Vance," Evelyn said, a small smile forming. "It seems you've just earned a promotion. How would you like to lead the new audit team?" Alara looked at her father's sketchbook, then back at the CEO. She gave a small, humble nod. "He taught me," she said softly, "that a structure is only as strong as its most honest part. I would be honored." The moral line had been drawn, not with a shout, but with a whisper of truth that had reshaped their entire world. 6 months later, an article appeared in Architecture Today magazine. The headline read, "The Vance Principle: How a 22-year-old's integrity is forcing a revolution in skyscraper safety." The story, complete with a picture of a smiling Alara Vance standing beside Evelyn Reed, went viral. It wasn't just a story about a flawed building. It was a story about a flawed system being forced to change. Alara was no longer the invisible intern. She now headed the firm's new structural integrity division. It was a permanent department, created by Evelyn, with the sole purpose of stress-testing every design before a single brick was laid. Her office, bright and filled with young, eager architects she was now mentoring, looked out over the city. On her desk, her father's worn leather sketchbook sat in a place of honor, next to a framed blueprint of the newly redesigned, and now safe, Zenith Tower. The design credit now read, Croft, Ethelred, and Vance. Frank, now her senior advisor, often stopped by her office. "You know," he said one afternoon, watching her patiently explain a complex concept to a new intern, "your father always believed that one honest voice could redesign the world." He smiled. He was right. Alara's quiet act of courage had sent ripples through the entire industry. Other major firms, fearing their own hidden flaws, began implementing their own Vance principles. Her name became synonymous not with design flair, but with something far more important: trust. She had done more than just save a building. She had begun to rebuild a culture. She was proving that the strongest legacy you can leave isn't one of steel and glass, but one of character. The view from Julian Croft's new office was of a brick wall. After the audit revealed a pattern of cutting corners and taking credit for the work of junior staff, he was quietly forced to resign. No public firing, just a slow, silent fade into obscurity. He now worked at a small, suburban firm, reviewing permit applications for shopping malls and parking garages. The soaring legacy he had dreamed of was gone. He sat alone, staring at a picture on his phone of the original Zenith Tower design, a ghost of the glory he had almost had. His desk was empty, save for a termination letter from his last project, a project delayed because of his miscalculations. He had become the very thing he'd always despised: irrelevant. A notification popped up on his phone. It was the Architecture Today article about Alara, shared again on a social media platform. He swiped it away, but the image was burned into his mind. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a hollow, aching emptiness. He had built his career on a foundation of ego, and it had crumbled just like his flawed design. He whispered to the empty room, his voice raspy with regret. "I should have just listened." The silence that answered him was the only legacy he had left. In the end, real power isn't about the position you hold or the volume of your voice. It's about the strength of your integrity, a foundation that no amount of arrogance can crack. Ilara Vance didn't seek revenge, she sought the truth. And in doing so, she built something far greater than a skyscraper. She built a future. Ilara is at a university, guest lecturing. She's holding her father's sketchbook, and she hands it to a young, nervous-looking female student, encouraging her to look at a page. Ilara smiles the same quiet, powerful smile. True greatness is never given. It's built, quietly, one honest decision at a time. What would you do if you were the only one who knew the truth? Subscribe for more stories of quiet heroes changing the world.